The Ottawa River is rising. It has been rising since the beginning of last week, fed by days of rainfall and an accelerating snowmelt from the unregulated northern basin, the vast, largely roadless watershed north of the river that drains into the main stem with no reservoir system to control the flow. As of Monday, April 20th, 2026, the Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board has confirmed that minor flood levels have been exceeded at most flood-prone areas along the river from Pembroke, Ontario, all the way downstream to Carillon, Quebec. Major flood levels, the threshold at which several streets and buildings are directly affected, have been exceeded, or are expected to be exceeded, by Tuesday from Lake Coulonge to Carillon. In Gatineau, Quebec, directly across the river from Canada's capital, 164 buildings are at risk of flooding and 41 streets have been closed as of Monday morning. Gatineau Mayor Maude Marquis-Bissonnette dispatched firefighters door to door overnight to warn residents whose homes were in the path of the rising water. Water levels in Gatineau were expected to peak on Monday, the mayor said in a Sunday briefing, before beginning to stabilize by the weekend. The city estimated a rise of roughly 30 centimeters on Monday morning alone. 4 sandbag pickup locations are operating across the city. Emergency crews stepped up overnight response operations through the weekend. 118 kilometers to the west, the community of Fort-Coulonge, Quebec, a town of approximately 1,300 people in the Pontiac region, declared a state of emergency Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Council activated emergency powers to quickly mobilize resources and limit the impacts of what officials are calling the spring freshet. 2 sand dikes were erected, one on Rue de Bordelot and one on the earth bridge on Rue Baume, to prevent water from reaching homes in the most vulnerable areas. The Marchand Bridge, known locally as the Red Bridge, was closed until further notice. The White Bridge remained under surveillance. Officials asked residents to reduce drinking water consumption until the end of the flood to keep the water treatment plant in good working order. The town's official communication to residents listed a specific phone number, 819-664-0301, to obtain sandbags, with filling remaining the responsibility of citizens. The Coulonge River, flowing through the Fort-Coulonge area, reached 700 cubic meters per second, nearly 10 times its average flow rate. What is unfolding along the Ottawa River this week is the 4th major spring flood in the region in the last 10 years. It follows major events in 2017, 2019, and 2023. It is not a record-breaking event. The Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board's peak estimates for most locations sit approximately 60 centimeters below the all-time record set in 2019 and below the 2023 peaks. But it is a significant and ongoing emergency affecting communities across a corridor stretching from Pembroke in the west to Carillon in the east, and it is not over. The cause of the flooding is the same mechanism that produces nearly every major Ottawa River spring flood. A combination of factors converging at the worst possible time. The first factor is snowmelt. The northern portion of the Ottawa River Basin, the unregulated catchment that does not have large reservoirs to absorb and manage runoff, held a substantial snowpack going into the spring. The Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board's assessment noted that the snowpack remaining in the northern basin from Ottawa to Lake Coulonge was high enough that the risk of further water level increases over the coming weeks remains elevated even after the current peak passes. As temperatures rise and that snowpack continues to melt, additional water flows into the river system. The second factor is rainfall. Environment Canada issued rainfall warnings for western Quebec over the weekend, forecasting up to 25 millimeters of rain in some areas. Those warnings have since been lifted, but the rain that fell in the days before this week's peak contributed directly to the surge. Tom Al, a professor of earth and environmental science at the University of Ottawa, described the specific problem with precision. Many parts of the Ottawa River catchment still have frozen ground, which removes the soil's ability to absorb rainfall before it flows into streams and rivers. That storage is really key at a time like this, Al said. Given all the water that we've had in the form of rain, there really isn't much storage capacity left. That's the problem. When the ground cannot absorb water, every millimeter of rain becomes direct runoff that reaches the river within hours, rather than being held in the soil for gradual release. The third factor is the reservoir system's limitations. The Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board manages a network of upstream reservoirs that can retain some spring runoff and slow the surge reaching downstream communities. The board has been actively managing those reservoirs throughout this event to reduce flooding downstream. But the northern unregulated basin, the part of the watershed with no reservoir infrastructure, cannot be managed. What falls or melts there reaches the main stem of the Ottawa River without any buffering. The combination of all three factors produced the current situation. Peak levels that the board's April 19th estimates placed at Pembroke at 113.10 meters, Las Coulonge at 108.60 meters, Chats Lake at 75.70 meters. Lake de Chêne at 60.25 meters, the Gatineau Hull Marina at 44.50 meters, and Thurso at 43.11 meters. These levels exceed the 2025 peak by margins ranging from 25 centimeters at Pembroke to 95 centimeters at the Gatineau Hole Marina. They remain below the catastrophic 2019 all-time records by approximately 60 centimeters across most of the affected stretch. The geographic scope of the flooding along the Ottawa River corridor covers dozens of communities and hundreds of kilometers. Each community is experiencing the same rising river at a different point along its length, at different local terrain, and with different infrastructure in place. In Gatineau, the flooding is concentrated in the Pointe-à-Gatineau and Templeton sectors, with the Highway 50 eastbound ramp to Rue Saint-Louis closed due to water levels, as it has been in past major floods. Photographs from the weekend showed floodwaters covering sidewalks on Rue Saint-Louis, people helping push a car through water on that same street, and a flooded walkway at the Hull Marina where a sandwich board for a water taxi was floating free of its normal placement. The city has 4 sandbag pickup locations operating, including at Lac Beauchamp Park, where the city has begun allowing flatbed trucks to facilitate larger-scale pickup operations. In Constance Bay, a community in Ottawa's west end along the river, resident Daryl Martin summarized the uncertainty that affects anyone who lives in a flood-prone area along the Ottawa. We're all concerned because once the water starts rising, who knows when it's going to stop? We can put out sandbags now, but who knows if it's going to be a waste of time? Photographs from Monday morning showed floodwaters surrounding homes in Constance Bay. Parts of Britannia Beach and Ottawa's west end were also flooded Monday as water levels continue to rise along the Ottawa River. In Clarence Rockland, east of Ottawa, roads, parkland, and some properties along the river have been flooded, with the city warning that water levels are still rising and that in some areas, flooded roads could limit access, while a small number of properties may see water approaching homes. In Arnprior, Riverside Drive is closed between Lena Street and McLean Street due to flooding. The Ecolos Ferry between Thurso and Clarence Rockland is closed. The Bourbonnais Ferry between Cumberland and Masson-Angers is operating under restrictions. Road access to Petrie Island in Ottawa's East End has been cut off, with residents watching closely as water rises. In Mansfield et Pontefract, evacuations have been underway. This community sits along the Coulonge River approximately 120 kilometers northwest of downtown Gatineau, and the Coulonge River's extraordinary flow rate of 700 cubic meters per second, 10 times its average, has been a direct driver of flooding pressure in this part of the basin. The 2026 event is the 4th major spring flood to hit the Ottawa-Gatineau area in the past decade. The 2017 flood was significant and unexpected in its scale. It struck communities that had not seen major flooding in years, prompting a substantial emergency response and leaving thousands of properties damaged across both the Ontario and Quebec sides of the river. The 2019 flood was worse. It set all-time records at multiple measurement points along the river, left thousands of properties flooded, and reached communities that had never experienced direct flooding before. It became the benchmark against which all subsequent spring flood events are measured. The 2023 flood was the most recent major event before this year. Last year, 2025, was considered a minor flood year, some relief for communities that had experienced 3 major events in the preceding 7 years. Now in 2026, the event is above 2025 levels, but below 2023 levels across most of the affected stretch. The repetition of major flooding events over a decade has prompted increasing attention to a question that Ottawa-Gatineau communities are asking directly: whether the region's flood-prone areas can continue to be protected through the emergency response model of sandbagging, evacuation orders, and temporary dikes, or whether more permanent structural solutions, buyouts of the most vulnerable properties, permanent dike infrastructure, changes to land use planning along the riverbank, are required to address what is becoming a recurring reality. Quebec. Premier Christine Frechette addressed this on Sunday, calling flooding an increasingly common occurrence in the province and linking the pattern explicitly to climate change. She said 4 regions were being closely monitored: the Outaouais region, including Gatineau, Argenteuil, Quebec City, and Lanaudière, and that the government was in close contact with mayors in each area and ready to provide assistance as needed. Environment Canada also issued a storm surge warning for Quebec City on Monday, warning of higher than normal water levels along riverbanks at high tide on the St. Lawrence, a separate flooding concern running parallel to the Ottawa River situation. Gatineau's Civil Security Director, Dennis Doucet, told reporters Sunday that the region could remain at risk for at least 2 more weeks. High water levels and continued snowmelt from the north mean the slow recession that follows a flood peak leaves communities exposed. Any additional rainfall during that recession period can push levels higher again before the overall trend downward resumes. For residents in the affected communities, the practical situation on Monday involves several parallel challenges. The immediate concern for those in flood zones is property protection. Sandbags are available at multiple locations: 4 sites in Gatineau, 14 in Ottawa, and at various municipal locations across the affected area. The Fort-Coulonge Arena Yard is providing free sand with bags available by calling 819-1664-0301. Students from École Secondaire Sieur de Coulonge were mobilized last week to help fill sandbags in preparation for the anticipated flooding, a community response that illustrates how embedded flood preparedness has become in the culture of river communities that have experienced multiple major events. In Fort-Coulonge, officials are asking residents to reduce water consumption to protect the water treatment plant, a reminder that flooding affects not just homes and roads, but the utility infrastructure that communities depend on. Road closures are extensive, and the list continues to change as water levels move. The Highway 50 ramp in Gatineau, Riverside Drive in Arne-Prior, Tweddle Road and Boissé Lane in Ottawa's East End, ferry connections between communities, all are affected. Residents in communities separated by the river, who rely on the Acolos or Bourbonnais ferries for cross-river access, need to find alternative routes that may add significant time and distance to their daily travel. Petrie Island in Ottawa's East End is currently accessible only by boat. A road that was open last week is now underwater. The evacuations underway in Mansfield et Pontefract continue, with residents displaced from their homes along the Coulonge River. In Fort-Coulonge, the state of emergency declaration gives the municipality expanded authority to mobilize resources, redirect spending without the normal approval process, and coordinate the response across departments. Mayor Pierre Cyr described the situation Sunday as manageable, a word chosen carefully to project control while acknowledging that the water was still rising and would continue rising into Monday. The dikes were in place, the bridge was closed, the treatment plant was being protected, the town was doing what it could, and beneath all of the immediate emergency management activity is the longer-term reality that the Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board stated clearly on Sunday. Water levels are expected to plateau or slowly decline over the next 2 weeks, but the risk of further increases from Mattawa to Lake Coulonge remains higher than normal given the snowpack still sitting in the northern part of the basin. Colder temperatures forecast until Wednesday should slow the melt temporarily. No rain is expected this week, which provides some relief, but the combination of high water levels expected to persist for 2 weeks, a northern snowpack that has not yet fully melted, and a watershed in which the ground cannot absorb additional rainfall if it comes, all of it adds up to a situation in which the worst-case scenario has not yet been ruled out. This flood is at or near its peak in most locations. It is not yet over. And the region's emergency management officials are asking the public clearly, do not assume that peak means the danger has passed.